The Blackwood estate was a gilded cage, and its heiress Isabella, a queen of indifference, until my forbidden secret, a wild raven, challenged the very foundation of her frozen world. The first rule of working at the Blackwood estate was simple. Pretend you don't exist. We were ghosts who polished silver and fluffed pillows, a silent army of beige uniforms against a backdrop of obscene wealth. The house wasn't a home. It was a museum of a life that had forgotten how to live. Marble floors so polished you could see your own despair in it. Paintings worth more than my entire hometown. And a silence so profound it felt like it was actively trying to suffocate you. And at the heart of this gilded cage was Isabella Blackwood. Isabella, the 28-year-old heiress, was the queen of this cold kingdom. She didn't yell. Yelling would require passion. Isabella was a black hole of indifference. She moved through the mansion like a spectre, her face a mask of bored contempt for everything and everyone in her orbit. She never used our names. I was the one who does the upstairs floors. Maria was the cook. James was the driver. We were functions, not people. I once saw her walk past her own father, the billionaire himself, without a word of greeting, her eyes fixed on her phone as if he were just another piece of expensive furniture. Her cruelty was a quiet, insidious thing. A few weeks into my employment, I was serving her iced tea by the pool. My hand must have trembled because a single drop of condensation fell from the glass onto the pristine white marble beside her lounge chair. I froze, my apology already forming on my lips. Isabella didn't look at me. She slowly, deliberately lifted her perfectly manicured finger and pointed at the minuscule drop of water. "Clean that," she said, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion. Then she picked up her $1,000 sunglasses and put them on, dismissing my entire existence. I spent the next 10 minutes on my hands and knees with a microfiber cloth, my face burning with humiliation, while she scrolled through her phone not 2 feet away. She hated everyone, and she made sure we all knew it. My life there was a cycle of silent servitude and lonely evenings in my small, sterile room in the staff wing, until I found the secret. Behind the perfectly manicured rose gardens and the ridiculous topiary zoo was a forgotten corner of the estate. A crumbling Victorian-style glasshouse, choked with ivy and vines. It was deemed structurally unsafe, so no one ever went there. No one but me. It was my sanctuary. Inside, the world of the Blackwoods melted away. It was wild and alive, with overgrown ferns and rogue flowers bursting through the cracked floor tiles. And it was there I met him. Corvus. He was a raven, and I'd found him with a broken wing, huddled beneath a rotting wooden bench. I'd spent weeks secretly nursing him back to health, sneaking him scraps from the kitchen and binding his wing with strips of old cloth. I expected him to fly away the moment he was able. But he didn't. He stayed. He was intelligent, impossibly so. He would tilt his head as I spoke to him, his eyes like polished jet beads, seeming to understand my loneliness. He would bring me gifts, a shiny bottle cap, a smooth grey stone, a lost earring from one of Isabella's long-forgotten garden parties. He was the only creature in that entire place that looked at me like I was a person. He was my friend. Our friendship was a fragile, beautiful secret in a house made of glass and stone. Every day during my 30-minute lunch break, I would sneak away to the glass house. It was the only time I felt truly myself. I'd share my sandwich with Corvus, telling him about the silent contempt of the Ice Queen, the impossible demands, the crushing weight of being invisible. He would caw softly, or hop onto my shoulder, nuzzling his head against my cheek. It was a bizarre, tiny pocket of warmth in an Arctic world, but I knew the danger. If anyone found out, especially Isabella, I wouldn't just be fired. She was the type to see a wild thing and want it caged or destroyed, simply because it was free. One late afternoon, the sky was turning a bruised purple, and a storm was rolling in. I'd finished my duties early and couldn't resist the pull of my sanctuary. I slipped out the back service door and made my way to the glass house, the wind whipping my hair across my face. Inside, it was warm and humid. Corvus was perched on an old iron trellis, waiting for me. I pulled out a small piece of cheese I had saved for him. "Hello, my handsome friend," I whispered, smiling for what felt like the first time all day. He swooped down and landed gently on my outstretched arm, taking the offering from my fingers. I was so lost in the moment, in the simple joy of his presence, that I didn't hear the creak of the old rusted door behind me. I didn't notice the sudden shift in the light as a shadow fell over us. I just felt a sudden, bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the coming storm. And then, a voice, as cold and sharp as a shard of glass, cut through the silence. "What in the world is that?" I froze, my heart stopping in my chest. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light, was Isabella. My blood turned to ice. Corvus, sensing my terror, dug his talons almost painfully into my arm and let out a low, guttural squawk. His feathers bristled. I instinctively tried to shield him with my body, turning slightly away from the doorway as if that could somehow make us invisible again. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Fired. I was going to be fired. Or worse. I'd heard stories about what Mr. Blackwood did to trespassers on his other properties. Isabella took a slow, deliberate step into the glass house. Her pristine white silk blouse and tailored trousers seemed to glow in the gloom, a stark contrast to the decay around us. She looked utterly alien here. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, weren't on me. They were locked onto Corvus. There was no anger in her expression, which was somehow more terrifying. There was just an intense, unnerving focus, a scientist studying a new and possibly disgusting specimen. "I can explain, Miss Blackwood," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "He was hurt. His wing was broken. I was helping him." She ignored my explanation completely, as if I hadn't spoken. She took another step closer, her expensive leather shoes making no sound on the damp, mossy floor. "You've been coming here," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, cold and final. She had noticed my absences. Of course she had. Nothing escaped her notice. "I'm so sorry, miss." "I'll stop. I'll let him go right now," I pleaded, my mind racing. Maybe if I showed immediate compliance, she'd just fire me and be done with it. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her voice cutting through my panic. "Its wing is still weak. It wouldn't survive the storm." For the first time, her gaze flickered to me, and it was filled with such profound disdain that I flinched. "Even you should know that." She was now only a few feet away. Corvus shifted on my arm, his dark eyes tracking her every move. He was wary, but not frightened. He seemed as curious as she was. Isabella tilted her head, her perfectly styled hair not moving an inch. "What do you call it?" she asked. "Corvus," I breathed out. A small, humorless smile touched her lips for a fleeting second. "Corvus. How droll." She fell silent again, the only sounds being the wind rattling the broken panes of glass and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I braced myself for the inevitable verdict, for the cold dismissal, for the order to have animal control come and take my only friend away. Instead, something truly strange happened. Corvus, with a soft caw, launched himself from my arm. My heart leapt into my throat. Was he attacking her? But he didn't fly at her. He flew to a dark, cluttered corner of the glass house, to a pile of rotting terracotta pots. He landed, rustled around for a moment, and then flew back, not to me, but to a crumbling stone bench that sat between me and Isabella. He landed on the back of it, and with a decisive little nod of his head, he dropped something small and shiny onto the grimy surface. It was the earring, a diamond stud, shaped like a tiny star. I recognized it instantly. I had seen Isabella wear them. I'd thought he'd found it in the garden, but it must have been here all along. Isabella's gaze dropped to the earring. Her carefully constructed mask of indifference finally cracked. It was a hairline fracture, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and her eyes, for just a single moment, held an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't anger or surprise. It looked impossibly like pain. The moment passed as quickly as it came. She schooled her features back into their usual cold neutrality. She looked from the earring to Corvus and then finally to me. Her stare was so intense it felt like it was pinning me to the wall. I held my breath, waiting. The air was thick with unspoken things, with the storm outside and the storm inside this forgotten building. She turned her back to me, looking out at the thrashing trees through a grimy pane of glass. My fate, the fate of Corvus, hung suspended in that terrible silence. Finally she spoke, her voice low and commanding, not a trace of its earlier flatness. "Tomorrow," she said, without turning around, "after my breakfast has been cleared, bring him to the West Solarium, and if you breathe a word of this to anyone, the cook, the driver, anyone, I will make sure you not only never work in this town again, but that you never work anywhere again." She walked out of the glass house without another word, leaving me standing in the growing darkness with my heart hammering against my ribs. I stared at the empty doorway, then down at Corvus, who hopped onto my shoulder as if nothing had happened. My legs felt weak. The West Solarium was her private space, a sun-drenched room filled with orchids and plush white furniture, a place no staff member ever entered unless specifically summoned for a reprimand. My relief at not being fired was instantly swallowed by a wave of cold, terrifying dread. She wasn't just letting me get away with it. This wasn't a pardon. It was a summons. And I had a sickening feeling that I and my secret friend were about to become the Ice Queen's new favorite toy. The next morning was agony. Every tick of every gilded clock in the mansion sounded like a countdown to my doom. I served Mr. Blackwood his breakfast in a daze, my hands trembling so badly I nearly spilled his orange juice. He, as usual, didn't notice. He was already barking into his phone about mergers and acquisitions, a world away from my petty fears. The mansion felt different today, charged with a new kind of tension. Or maybe it was just me. Every shadow seemed to hold Isabella's cold stare. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like her approaching footsteps. After her breakfast tray was cleared, a single, untouched croissant and a black coffee, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. It was time. My heart hammered against my ribs as I made my way back to the staff wing, my beige uniform feeling like a prisoner's garb. How was I supposed to just walk through the main house with a raven? I half expected alarms to blare and security guards to tackle me, but the mansion remained silent, indifferent. I retrieved Corvus from the glass house. He seemed to sense the strangeness of it all, staying unusually quiet as I tucked him gently into a large canvas tote bag, leaving the top open so he could breathe. He poked his head out, his intelligent eyes blinking in the unfamiliar light of the service corridors. Walking through the opulent hallways, past priceless vases and portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors, felt surreal. I was a spy smuggling contraband, my tote bag containing a secret that could shatter the fragile peace of my existence here. The West Solarium was on the second floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the storm-battered gardens. It was as beautiful and sterile as I'd imagined. White orchids bloomed in perfect, soulless arrangements. White couches, that probably cost more than my car, were arranged with geometric precision, and there, sitting in a sleek white armchair with a book in her lap, was Isabella. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable. "You're late," she said. Her voice was calm. "I'm sorry, miss. I was discreet." She gestured to the empty armchair opposite her. "Let it out." My hands fumbled with the tote bag. Corvus hopped out onto the floor, shook his magnificent glossy feathers, and looked around the pristine room with an air of regal curiosity. He didn't seem intimidated at all. He hopped onto a low glass table, narrowly missing a crystal sculpture, and let out a soft caw, as if announcing his arrival. I held my breath, expecting Isabella to flinch or recoil. She didn't. She just watched him. She closed her book, placing it carefully on the table beside her. Then she did something that shocked me to my core. She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out a small, perfect wild strawberry. She held it out on her open palm. Her arm extended, her fingers perfectly still. "Come here," she said. Her voice soft, almost a whisper. It was the gentlest I had ever heard her speak. Corvus tilted his head, considering her. He looked at me, then back at her outstretched hand. I gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He hopped off the table and, with a few confident strides, walked over to her. He delicately plucked the strawberry from her palm with his beak, and swallowed it in one gulp. My jaw was on the floor. Isabella didn't smile, but the hard lines around her mouth seemed to soften. She slowly, carefully, extended a single finger and gently stroked the top of his head. Corvus, my wild, wary friend who trusted no one but me, leaned into her touch. I felt a bizarre mix of jealousy and utter astonishment. Who was this person? Where was the Ice Queen who made me scrub a single drop of water from the floor? He found my earring, she said, her eyes still on Corvus. It was my mother's. I thought I'd lost it in the glass house the day she left. The last few words were so quiet I wasn't sure I'd heard them right. Her mother. I knew from staff gossip that Mrs. Blackwood hadn't died. She had just vanished from their lives years ago. Packed a bag and walked away from the Billions, from the mansion, from her family. No one ever spoke of her. Isabella looked up at me then, and her eyes were different. The icy wall was gone, and for a split second I saw a raw, aching vulnerability that was far more unsettling than her usual contempt. She loved that old glass house, she said, her voice distant. She used to say it was the only place in this house where things were allowed to be messy, where things were allowed to grow wild. And then I understood. The glass house wasn't just my sanctuary. It had been hers, too, or her mother's. The earring wasn't just a lost piece of jewelry. It was a relic, a tangible piece of a memory she had locked away. Corvus hadn't just returned a diamond. He had returned a piece of her past. For the next hour, we sat there in the most surreal tableau. Me, the lowly maid, perched on the edge of $1,000 armchair. Isabella, the billionaire's daughter, silently feeding Corvus pieces of fruit and stroking his feathers. She didn't speak to me, but she didn't dismiss me either. It felt like I was a necessary part of the equation, the bridge between her and this wild creature that had unlocked something inside her. The air was thick with unspoken grief, with years of silent, lonely pain. Finally, she stood up. The brief truce was over. "Leave him here," she commanded, her voice regaining some of its familiar steel. "Go back to your duties. Come back for him before dinner." I hesitated. "Miss, he's not a pet. He needs to be outside." "The storm hasn't passed," she stated, looking out the window. "He will stay here. Now go." I didn't have a choice. I gave Corvus one last worried look and backed out of the solarium, my mind reeling. What had just happened? Had I just witnessed a breakthrough? Or had I just handed my only friend over to his new captor? The rest of the day was a blur of polishing and dusting, my thoughts consumed by the scene in the solarium. When the time came to retrieve him, I approached the room with a sense of deep foreboding. I pushed the door open quietly. The room was bathed in the warm, orange glow of the setting sun. Isabella was no longer there. The chair she had sat in was empty. For a terrifying second, I thought Corvus was gone too. Then I saw him. He was perched on the back of the white armchair, perfectly still, but he wasn't alone. In his beak, he was holding something. It was a small, rectangular piece of stiff paper, a photograph. As I got closer, my blood ran cold. It was an old, faded photo of a smiling woman with Isabella's eyes, and a much younger, happier-looking Isabella. And across the back of the armchair, lying where Isabella had been sitting, was a long, deep, and unmistakably fresh scratch in the pristine white leather, right next to a small, dark stain that looked terrifyingly like blood. My breath caught in my throat. The scratch on the chair was deep, a violent gash in the perfect, opulent world Isabella had built around herself. The dark spot next to it. I didn't want to think about what it was. Corvus dropped the photograph onto the seat and flew to my shoulder, nuzzling against my neck as if seeking comfort. I reached out a trembling hand and picked up the photo. It showed a woman, her mother, I presumed, laughing, her arms wrapped around a teenage Isabella who was beaming with a genuine, unburdened joy I couldn't have imagined on her face. It was a ghost from another life. Panic set in. What had happened here? Did Corvus bite her? Did she hurt him in return? I checked him over frantically, but he seemed perfectly fine, just a little agitated. I scooped him up, grabbed the photo, and fled the solarium, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm of escape. I had to get him out of there. out of the mansion, away from her. I half ran through the silent corridors, expecting to be stopped at any moment. But the house remained still, a sleeping giant unaware of the drama unfolding in its veins. I burst into the safety of the glasshouse, the humid air, a welcome relief. I set Corvus down and sank onto the crumbling bench, my mind racing. This had gone too far. My secret friendship had breached the walls of her fortress, and the result was chaos and a blood-stained chair. I had to leave. I would pack my meager belongings tonight and disappear before sunrise. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing pulse, the old rusted door creaked open once more. I jumped to my feet, ready to run, but it was Isabella. She stood in the doorway, her face pale in the twilight. She wasn't wearing her perfect silk blouse anymore. She was in a simple gray sweatshirt, and she was holding her left hand wrapped in a white handkerchief. The handkerchief was dotted with red. "He bit you," I whispered, a statement of fact. She looked down at her wrapped hand. "I deserved it," she said, her voice quiet and hoarse. I tried to take the photograph from him. He wouldn't let go. She took a hesitant step inside, her eyes not on me, but on the wild, overgrown space around us. This was her place. After she left, my father had the door locked. He wanted to tear it down, erase her. I was the one who stopped him. I told him it was structurally unsound, that it was a liability. It was the only piece of her I could save. She finally looked at me, and the ice was gone. All of it. In its place was just a profound, aching loneliness that mirrored my own. "All these years," she said, her voice cracking. "I've hated this house. I've hated everyone in it because they weren't her. I pushed everyone away because I was terrified they would leave too. It was easier to be cold. It was safer to be hated." Corvus, who had been watching from his perch on the trellis, let out a soft caw. He flew down and landed on the bench between us, a silent arbiter. He looked at Isabella, then at me. "He's not a pet," Isabella said, echoing my own words from earlier. "He's a friend. He brought me something I thought I'd lost forever. Not the earring. The memory." She looked at her hand. "He reminded me that some things are worth holding on to, even if it hurts." In that moment, standing in the crumbling glass house with the billionaire's daughter and a raven, the vast chasm between our worlds seemed to disappear. We were just two lonely people, brought together by a shared secret and a wild creature who saw past our uniforms and our walls of ice. "My name is Anna," I said softly. A flicker of a real genuine smile touched her lips. "Isabella," she replied. "We didn't become best friends overnight. The mansion didn't suddenly fill with warmth and laughter, but something had fundamentally shifted. The next day when I brought her breakfast tray, she looked me in the eye and said, 'Thank you, Anna.' Later that week I saw her speaking to Maria, the cook, asking about her grandson by name. The change was subtle, a quiet thawing. The silence in the mansion was still there, but it felt less oppressive now, more peaceful. The glass house became a shared sanctuary. Sometimes I would find her there, just sitting on the bench, not saying anything, just watching the way the light filtered through the dusty glass. Corvus would often sit with her, a silent companion. She never tried to touch him again unless he offered, a lesson learned in blood and leather. She had the old structure quietly reinforced and the glass repaired, not to restore it to its former glory, but just to make it safe from the storms. She left the inside wild and overgrown. One afternoon, a few months later, she found me there with Corvus. "My father is selling one of the smaller properties up north," she said. Her tone casual, but her eyes were serious. "It has a guest cottage, and a very large, very old garden that needs a caretaker." She paused. "It's yours if you want it. A proper salary. No more beige uniforms." Tears pricked my eyes. It wasn't just a job offer. It was freedom. It was a future. "What about Corvus?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "The cottage has a very large raven-friendly porch," she said, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "And I imagine he'll have a frequent visitor." And so my time at the Blackwood estate came to an end. I left the world of silent servitude and gilded cages behind, but I didn't leave empty-handed. I left with a strange and wonderful story, a generous new beginning, and two of the most unlikely friends a person could ever hope for. A billionaire's daughter who learned to feel again, and a clever, loyal raven who proved that sometimes the wildest hearts are the ones that can teach us the most about being human.